All right, so now that we have covered the creation of the American presidency at that convention, 1787, Philadelphia, Article 2, let's talk about, in these set of slides, the historical evolution of the office of the American presidency, and then the president's role as, in some ways, a legislator in chief. Okay, so in terms of the evolution of the American presidency, as we've discussed at the outset, the vision of the Founding Fathers, rightly or wrongly, was kind of a Congress as first among equals scenario, right, where Congress was meant to be preeminent, the presidency a bit less preeminent, and then the courts the least dangerous. Right, so that's how we start out. There were exceptions, even relatively early on in our history, with remarkably powerful presidents that were probably stronger than Congress for a brief time. Abraham Lincoln, right, the Civil War. Theodore Roosevelt, with his progressive kind of trust-busting approach to get these emerging large corporations under control in a democracy. But those were exceptions, right? And once they left office, the office got smaller again, and Congress again was preeminent. Where it all changes right up to the present day would be Franklin Delano Roosevelt, his New Deal, and that was the creation, right, of this permanent executive branch bureaucracy to implement a program of regulation and a welfare state. Right, so what that means is, right, from that day forward, and it's only gotten a lot bigger since, is a permanent federal bureaucracy that serves at the pleasure of the president, right, where the president is the chief executive of this now vastly expanded executive branch. That's a game changer. That's a game changer. Because up until then, the federal bureaucracy was very small, vestigial, minor, all right, minor. So this is a big deal. And also, right, we emerge out of World War II as a global superpower. Right, we have been moving in that direction, really, for quite some time. But after World War II, it is a done deal, right? We are now one of two global superpowers. On the other side is the Soviet Union, right? So once we become a superpower, right, what do you need to support that and make it happen? A large military. Right, what does a large military do? It strengthens the American presidency, right? Because who's the commander-in-chief of the military? The president. What does the president now have at his disposal? A globally dominant military. Okay, that's a major structural power. So those are the two big changes with FDR as president, right? We have a vastly expanded federal bureaucracy headed up by the president as chief executive, and we have a superpower military in which the president is commander-in-chief. So that makes the presidency structurally more powerful than Congress permanently right up to today, all right? Now, look, related to that, right, some say, well, all right, I mean, it is what it is, but have we gone too far with that? Have we evolved what Arthur Schlesinger many decades ago called an imperial presidency? Has the president become a kind of king or queen, too dominant over Congress? It's an interesting and important question. I would say that Donald Trump, as I think we've discussed, had autocratic aspirations, and if he gets reelected in 2024, which he might, he's made it super clear. You know, I was only just getting started that first term. If you give me a second chance, I will be extremely autocratic, okay, extremely autocratic. The presidency will be very imperial. So I think Trump had some of those aspirations in his first term. He did push some boundaries, but mostly the boundaries pushed back. All right, so his skill set wasn't great, right, in terms of amassing and exercising power, like working with Congress. So I think he had autocratic aspirations. I think his skill set was somewhat limited, and he didn't push as hard as he could have. Okay? I think if he has another chance, he's going to push a lot harder. He'll still have the same questionable skill set, but I think he's going to push a lot harder for an autocratic presidency. Maybe we're ready for that. He has a lot of support. Maybe that's what we want. A strong man. That's happening across the globe. We have not proven to be immune to I think, to me, a disturbing longing for a superhero to rescue us from an increasingly scary world. I think that's deeply wrong-headed, but it's a real thing here and elsewhere. And what we have now, right, is President Joe Biden. Love him or hate him, you would say that he does not have autocratic tendencies. He has no particular desire to be an autocrat. He does not function using a cult of personality at all. His personality's, kind of low-key and not all that charismatic. So no one thinks he's got a cult of personality going on or that he's an autocrat. You may or may not admire him, but you wouldn't think he's an autocrat. He's a classic old school, as you'd expect, because he's old. He's an old school institutionalist, right? Relying upon working cooperatively with Congress, reaching middle ground in many cases, giving independence to his Attorney General, to his Secretary of Transportation, Health and Human Services, right? Recognizing that there are other centers of power within the executive branch that he respects, that they have a significant amount of independence and autonomy. So right now we have an old school institutionalist that sort of fits our traditions. Trump is offering an alternative. It's an interesting possibility. As a political scientist who's a big fan of constitutional democracy, I find it profoundly disturbing. But I recognize empirically it has a lot of appeal to a lot of people right now. Right? I think we feel like people in other countries that globalism is something that is beyond our control, and Trump seems to offer easy solutions to this sense of globalism shaping us in ways we don't really want. So I think Trump has identified a real problem. The impact of globalism across the world has been problematic in all sorts of ways. It's produced this autocratic backlash, sort of people looking for a superhero to rescue them. I would argue we don't need rescue from without. We don't need no stinking superhero. We are the superheroes. We the people, governing through our institutions. That's the answer. That's the way to get at some issues raised by globalism. The issues that are raised by globalism, like economic dislocation, increased immigration, are sort of made even more challenging by the rise of climate change and things like the coronavirus. Look, these are very real threats, and dealing with them is going to be very challenging, and has been very challenging. But I do not believe the answer is to turn to an alleged superhero. I think we the people, need to be our own superhero in coping with these difficult issues. And the other thing I want to talk about here is this idea of the president as legislator in chief. Now, technically, is the president a legislator, right? We would have to say no. No, the president, right, is there to execute laws passed by Congress. But the president has a key role to play in what Congress does or does not get done. So, in that sense, yeah, the president is a legislator in chief. They can provide leadership and work with Congress to get laws passed that the president then helps carry out through the federal bureaucracy. All right, so what are some ways to do that? The State of the Union address, right, that the president gives every year where they address Congress and it gets play on national television and all that. So that's a way for the president to try to set an agenda for Congress, right? They can say, look, these are the challenges facing America today, whether it's infrastructure or COVID or the war in Ukraine, whatever the president wants to define as a priority, right? That's their chance to make their case to Congress and to the American people. Congress may or may not take that seriously, right? But it's a chance for the president to take his or her swings in helping to set the agenda for Congress. Second, the president can go directly to we the people, right? Go directly to we the people. Give a speech in primetime television. That's changing, right, with social media. But right, this is a tried and true method. Right, because if you can convince we the people that you're identifying the important issues, then they can put pressure on Congress to do something about it. There's no better example than President Ronald Reagan giving his primetime television speeches back in the day. He was known as the great communicator. He had a background as an actor in Hollywood. He used that very effectively to go directly to we the people and say, hey, we the people. Right? We need federal tax reform. Put pressure on Congress to do something about that. Hey, we the people. We need to rebuild our military after the Vietnam War debacle. Put pressure on Congress to do something about that. Right? So you can go sometimes directly to we the people. Some presidents are better than others, quite honestly. Some are better than others at that. Obama, very good. Ronald Reagan, very good. Biden, not so much. Trump, too divisive to really be very good at that. He only speaks to his base, nobody else. So yeah, the two of the most legendary figures would be Reagan and Obama. Perhaps Bill Clinton. Again, some are going to be better at that than others. It's a skill set. Not everybody has it. And then finally, right, the use of public opinion to move Congress related to going directly to we the people. A little bit different angle though, right? Public opinion. How do the people feel about the president? A president who is popular, right, all things being equal, a president who is popular will have more influence with Congress. A president who is unpopular will have less influence with Congress. So, what are some structural elements to public opinion related to the presidency? One, there is this thing called the honeymoon period, although that seems less and less a thing. But historically, when a president first assumed office, we the people would have a very positive view of that president, right? With the idea being, this is the new guy. Let's give him a chance. Let's see what he can do. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. The honeymoon. Typically the first 100 days of a presidency. Trump came in, not very popular right from the beginning. Biden came in, not that popular right from the beginning. So we might be seeing a new trend here. But historically, that was when a president was at his or her most popular, the first 100 days. And the idea is being, if that's when you're the most popular, get things done quickly, because that's your window. You got about a 3-month window, perhaps. And then related to that, this thing called the cycle effect, right? The idea that generally speaking, over time, presidential popularity tends to go down. Over time, you become less and less popular. It's one of the reasons presidents usually don't get a lot done if they get a second term. By then, they've become pretty unpopular, although popular enough to get reelected. So that cycle effect, again, would suggest, generally speaking, take advantage of your popularity at the start of your presidency, because it's usually all downhill from there. All right. War. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Say it again. Edwin Starr. Old Vietnam War era song. War. What is it good for? At the inception of a war, a president's opinion rating goes way up. Right? Whether it's World War II, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. At the beginning of a war, right, we sort of all pull together and support the president. Typically, at the inception, at the start of a war, a president's popularity will shoot up. Right? And that's a chance for the president to get things done on other issues. George W. Bush was really good at that, right? We invade Afghanistan, we invade Iraq, his approval ratings shoot up, and he uses that as leverage to get other things done with Congress. Smart. Also true, though, right, that what war giveth, war also taketh away. The longer a war goes on, the more things don't go as planned, which is often the case with war. The more we lose people, the more we spend treasure, right? The lower our opinion of the president. Look at George W. Bush, right? At the inception of those invasions, super popular. After a few years and things went poorly in both places, his approval rating shot down. Heck, by the time he left office at the end of his second term, his approval ratings were in the mid-20s. Let me say that again for effect. The mid-20s. So war giveth, war taketh away. Ask LBJ in Vietnam. Right? That's why he didn't run for a second term on his own, was because Vietnam had gone poorly and he was very unpopular. The economy, right? When the economy is doing well, we tend to give the president credit, although Biden feels like he's not getting that credit right now. It is what it is, right? Generally, we give the president credit for a good economy. And so that can benefit a president politically. Now, does a president really drive a good economy? Probably not. Presidents have limited influence over the American economy, partly because we're tied in with the global economy. But nevertheless, right, we tend to give a president credit for a good economy. We tend to blame a president for a poor economy. All right. So again, the economy giveth, the economy taketh away. Is a president typically responsible for a bad economy? Typically not. But do we still hold the president responsible for that? Yes, we do. Right. So during good economic times, generally a president will be more popular, therefore more powerful with Congress. When the economy is doing poorly, the president's approval ratings usually go down, and the president will have less leverage with Congress, generally speaking. Although again, right now we're in kind of a weird space with the economy doing quite well. Although I know inflation is a bit high, although I think it's now around 4%, which is not terrible at all. But I think people are still having sort of a negative view of the economy, although most people are actually doing better than they've ever done before. So it's tricky stuff. Finally, disasters and tragedies. Right, 9/11 as a tragedy, right? Hurricane Katrina hitting New Orleans, a disaster. What does that do to public opinion and the American presidency? If the perception is that the president is dealing with that thing effectively, the president's approval ratings can go way up. You know, where were George W. Bush's approval ratings after 9/11? Sky high. Sky high. So a tragedy or disaster that people think the president's doing a good job dealing with, that's going to be a tremendous boost for a president's popularity. Therefore, it gives them leverage with Congress. On the flippity flip, what if there's a disaster and the perception is that the president has not handled it well, right? The president's approval ratings will take a hit. Some think that may have doomed Trump's re-election effort in 2020, a perception that perhaps he didn't deal as effectively with COVID as he might have. A better example, Hurricane Katrina hitting New Orleans in early 2005, right after Bush started his second term as president. The perception was that he did not handle that disaster very well at all. And that dogged him for the rest of his time in office. He was perceived as inadequate to the job of dealing with Hurricane Katrina hitting New Orleans as hard as it did. So that negative perception led to negative approval ratings, which gave him no real relevance to Congress, right? Congress is like, your approval ratings are in the 30s or the 40s. Talk to the hand, because Congress don't understand. You're not popular. We're not going to work with you. You have no leverage over us.